Talking about palm oil. Palm oil has certainly been in the media recently, what with the recent supposed banning of the Iceland advert. Hi, I'm Donna from Good Fare, and we're an ethical shop setting out to help the planet and all who live on it. Since opening the shop, we've come across various issues, and palm oil is, of course, one of those that cropped up from time to time. As part of my role in the shop, I like to research issues to ensure that we're selling the most ethical products that we can find. And that includes products that don't harm the animals, products that are fairly traded, so don't come from child or adult slave labour markets, and products that are grown in sustainable ways, so that they don't cause unnecessary deforestation and protect our ecosystem. We set up the shop because the majority of the major brands and supermarkets are not producing ethical goods, and by the time that I'd boycotted all the main supermarket brands, I found myself with very little to eat, so the only logical step was to open up my own shop that did sell those brands that hit my ethical goals that I was trying to achieve. Now, it is worth pointing out that to find products that do hit like all of the ethical goals, it's pretty difficult to do in the world that we've currently built. So we're a very high consumerism world. We have like a high demand for very low cost and quick, easy processed foods and products of all types, and price matters. So in a lot of cases, we're picking like the best case scenarios and doing the best that we can. I don't personally think of myself as an eco-warrior. I'm just a normal person trying to do my best for the planet across a wide variety of different ethical issues. I have my own set of values, my own set of boycotts, my own ethical values that I choose to live by. And what we do as a shop is have a set of values that the products must conform to, and then we try to find the best and most ethical products that we can against those values, so that we're giving consumers the choice to select products that do reflect their own values without having to kind of scour through lots of labels as you would in lots of the supermarkets, or go online to find lots of hidden research. So in my research, of course, I've come across the palm oil issue before. And before I go on to say my piece, I just want to point out that I do not support any form of unsustainable farming methods. And obviously moving to sustainable farming across all ranges of crops is key to helping not harming our planet. But it's also worth pointing out that deforestation farming is a very complex issue. Many farming communities are in poverty. And one of the reasons for being so is that us in the West wanting to keep prices as low as possible, and the supermarkets and those brands driving those prices down and down, and then the poorest communities are the ones that are suffering ultimately. So everything is kind of linked together. There's not like one issue that affects others, it all kind of affects each other equally. So this mass movement that's kind of cropped up over the weekend in this like support Iceland because of the advert campaign that was supposedly banned. As soon as I saw that advert, I started to smell a rat, because not least because they were kind of pushing the message to boycott palm oil, which I believe is the wrong solution to the palm oil problem. Especially also when Iceland, along with the other supermarkets, probably have actually contributed to causing the palm oil problem in the first place, because they have this demand for cheap and processed foods within their ranges. So a little bit about palm oil. Where did it come from? Well, years and years ago there was this fat that they kind of developed in the labs called trans fats. Anyway, they thought that it was this miracle cure to saturated fats, until it turned out it was actually worse than saturated fats, and then they had to kind of quickly remove it from the products without trying to let us know that they were trying to secretly poison us for around 30 years and then kill us all off with heart disease. So palm oil was like an obvious choice to go to. Only had 50% saturated fat, which is better than a lot of other oils. It's also very high yielding, meaning that they can grow lots of it per hectare of land, particularly in the places where it grows. Also, palm oil is a very, very useful oil. It has many, many different types of uses, and it's not necessarily on its own like a bad oil. You could argue that it's not overly healthy, but there are a lot worse things out there for you. And around 40% of palm oil that is grown on small holdings, so that's like small farms. And moving to boycott palm oil, in my view, is probably only really going to affect those small holdings rather than the bigger farms, and then it's going to drive those small farmers into more poverty. because ultimately the problem with palm oil comes from the massive demand for it, and that is obviously, as we talked before, it's cheap and it's easy to grow. With our current consumer market wanting things that are cheap and easy, it fits perfectly into that. So maybe ourselves are culpable, who knows. So as this demand grows and grows, and obviously it can't be grown all over the world, it can only really be grown in certain areas. Unfortunately, the rainforests in those areas have suffered, and of course the poor orangutans suffered as well. Although it is worth pointing out at this point that the problem is not exclusive to palm oil. Like, deforestation is a problem worldwide, affecting many crops across the world and many animals and many ecosystems. So I think some respects poor palm oil obviously is kind of getting all the stick for all the deforestation. When we hear of deforestation, like, instantly we seem to think of palm oil, when palm oil is not even the largest crop that is destroying rainforests. More like soy grown for animal feed is the highest form of deforestation, followed by like timber. So across the world, I feel like it's kind of been a bit of an unnecessary scapegoat. So do we really need palm oil? And the truth is that yes, we probably could live without it, but at the moment it would be very challenging to kind of meet our current sort of the way we shop, the way we consume, as around 50% of all supermarket items contain it. It's probably easier to avoid it if you wanted to in food, not least because you can spot it in food products, because the EU legislation made it a requirement to put it in the ingredient list. It's more difficult to find in like cosmetics and particularly cleaning products. It doesn't tend to be listed in those, but it's used in a majority of them. There are like some blogs and things you can look at. People have like tried to be like a week without palm oil, and most people who've tried it have found it very, very difficult, because it does crop up everywhere and it has many different names. It's not always like palm oil, it's not always there like shouting out at you. To continue eating and using the product that we enjoy, currently there's just no real sustainable alternative to palm oil at this moment in time. So if you are choosing to avoid palm oil, you're going to need to be very careful what alternative you're going to be using, as it's likely to be less sustainable than palm oil. So to me, the obvious answer is to clean up the industry first, which is going to then obviously help make this oil sustainable, and then we can continue to enjoy the products that we have in it. By do this, we can then put pressure on organisations to check supply chains and ensure that they're coming from sustainable sources. Now, Iceland's very clever marketing campaign does fail to mention a few things. It doesn't really mention that they're only really banning palm oil from their own branded products, which means that they will continue to sell palm oil in other brands. It's also worth pointing out that their commitment, I think, was for 2020, so it's even not instantly. So their own branded products will still have palm oil in for a few years to come yet. And it's also, they fail to mention what they're replacing it with. And if they were to replace it with an equally destructive oil, this helps no one. And also, how many of their own branded products contained it in the first place? Because it's not very often found in frozen foods like burgers and chips and things. So I can imagine it was probably fairly easy for them to replace that in their frozen foods. I've actually asked these questions to Iceland. I'm still waiting for a response from them, so I'd be interested to find out what they do say. It's also worth pointing out that Iceland gets the Ethical Consumers Guide worst rating for palm oil out of the supermarkets. The best ones are actually Waitrose and Marks and Spencer's at the moment. They're getting the best ratings for supermarkets. Iceland also falls down on many other ethical issues, and to me this whole campaign, whilst on one hand is good because it's got people talking about palm oil and becoming aware of the issues surrounding it, which can only be a good thing, I do feel like the wrong message is being shared, and fear that this kind of new anti-palm oil wave that seems to be hitting us very strongly over the weekend is actually going to cause more destruction in other areas. If, for example, we did switch to another oil like coconut or olive, we're going to end up in the same, if not worse, problem, because remember, palm oil is the highest yielding oil. Therefore, if the demand for these other products were to rise, we're going to end up with deforestation in other parts of the world and with other crops, which also happens. So, and it actually already happens. There's deforestation in these other crops already. So palm oil is not the only crop that causes deforestation, destruction and damage to the environment. It's worth bearing that in mind. This is like a global problem created by bad business practices and ultimately from this real drive to get food as cheap and conveniently as possible for our ever-growing population numbers. And there are a number of initiatives that have been put in place to make palm oil more sustainable, and one of them being the sustainable certification from the RSPO, which had a lot of criticism, but equally I think has done a lot of good for the industry in trying to clean up palm oil, which actually is a very ambitious task, particularly since almost all the UK major supermarkets are claiming to source 100% sustainable palm oil. And yet, as we know, the industry is not 100% sustainable. It seems like an unbelievable claim to me. So it can be a bit like, well, okay, is sustainable palm oil a thing? And I believe that it is. I just believe that if we're shopping in supermarkets and with these large brand companies, maybe we don't trust everything they say, as we've seen time and time again. Supermarket supply chains fall into trouble, large manufacturer supply chains falling into trouble on many different levels and many different ethical issues. So I don't see why this one would be any different. So where does all this leave us as a consumer? Because it can seem very overwhelming. It can feel like, well, I want to help the planet. I want to know this, but what do I do? So I really think the key to all of this area is to just gain as much knowledge as possible. If you find an area that touches a nerve with you, like for example the plight of the orangutans, try and find out as much as possible about the issue so you can then make informed choices for what will work best for you. So whether that be boycotting palm oil out of your life or whether it be choosing sustainable options. For myself, I'm not going to be calling for any boycott to boycott palm oil, but I will be continuing to look for sustainable products where I can, and avoiding brands who are consistently irresponsible in their marketing and consistently fall down on their ethical values and issues. So really the best advice I can give you is to shop locally, shop at your local whole food shops, shop with your local food markets, and making small changes in your shopping habits. And these things can actually really make a big difference to protecting our planet and all who live on it. If you do want to keep in touch on any ethical issues, then subscribe to my channel below. More information on palm oil, links below in the comments down below. Thanks for listening.